the perspective that I've evolved to have, and I think, if you're thinking about refereeing or if you're a new referee, just remembering that above all is your job, right? Is to be a neutral and fair arbiter of the rules and to try and facilitate an environment for players where they can play fairly, they can play safely, and they can play beautifully.
Hello, and welcome to the Kick It with Katie podcast. Hey team, it's Katie here, and today I have Charlie Sandson. And Charlie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us where you're from, if you've moved around, just give us a little history about you, and then also your playing career in soccer.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be on the podcast, Katie. Thanks so much for having me. I've had a long and twisted road through the game over my probably, 17, 18 years now. Um, Grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, so definitely came up in one of what I would consider the country's soccer hotbeds. And unlike a lot of kids these days, didn't have parents who were too into sports or really invested in me being in sports. So I didn't really get seriously involved in soccer until probably eighth or ninth grade, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Started playing club soccer after my freshman year of college, or freshman year of high school, sorry. And quickly, got involved in a goalkeeping academy, was a goalkeeper, had an opportunity to train with some fantastic people, moved up to some better teams as I went on through high school, and played in college and everything. So played for RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic, under Adam Clinton, great coach, nothing but good things to say there.
Mm-hmm.
We had a couple really good years there. My junior year, we were a top five team in the country for D3 and made a run to the NCAA quarterfinals before losing to Amherst ultimately. And throughout that, I kind of began my journey into being a referee as well. So I refereed for a summer during college and then really got back to it after I graduated and was looking for a way to kind of stay, competitively involved with the game and, still kind of be in the fabric of competitive soccer, which I had been in my whole life. So
Mm-hmm.
since doing that, I've kind of evolved my soccer journey to maybe what I would call the next phase, and gotten into, a lot of maybe higher level refereeing than I ever might have expected to. And the journey's still unfolding with that. So yeah, happy to kind of give my overview. And as far as where I've been, RPI was in upstate New York, so I was there for a few years after living in Maryland. Spent a couple years in Boston after college, and then now I live in Washington, D.C. So I've been an Eastern Seaboard guy my whole life, but definitely been up and down the coast a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And did you play goalkeeper mostly your entire career? Any field experience, or mostly just keeper?
Mostly just keeper. So for some reason, always kind of had a strange draw to it, even from a very young age. Grew up, I think the first soccer game I ever remember watching was the Italy-France World Cup final, the famous one with the Zidane headbutt and everything. But I
Mm-hmm.
just remember being drawn to Buffon and him being my favorite player from a really, really young age and wanting to emulate him. So yeah, wish I had a little bit more field experience. I think especially looking back on where we've seen the modern goalkeeper go, it's a lot more playing with your feet. And that wasn't really a part of my game that clicked in until I was probably later on in high school and even into college. I was still getting better and better with my feet. Whereas I think you see a lot of modern goalkeepers these days, young kids that I've worked with coming up or just seen at the higher levels of refereeing, they all can play with their feet just as well as everybody else on the pitch. So definitely stress the importance of that. But for me, I was always a goalkeeper unless my high school team was winning by about 6 goals, and then they let me go up top and bang in a few.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a keeper mom and also a coach, and I kind of sort of, I don't know, at least when I played, we didn't necessarily have dedicated goalkeepers until we were a little bit older. We'd try and rotate whoever played in keeper. And then there were a few girls on my teams that, were the dedicated keepers and things like that. So, and now most of the keepers now just, and even when I was a kid, they still participated in all of the regular field activities. So have specialized keeper training that you attended versus team trainings, or did you do both?
Yeah, I did. So I used to, when I was starting out playing club soccer, I would train, I think twice a week when I was like a freshman and sophomore, and then did also goalkeeper trainings in addition to games on the weekend. I was really, really blessed to find my way into a goalkeeping academy, actually. So there's
Mm-hmm.
a great academy out there called Academy One Goalkeeping, run by a fantastic guy named Ed Brown, and he's basically made it his life's mission to gather goalkeeper talent from kind of the DMV area, and he would host group trainings in DC and Virginia and Maryland every weekend. So through that group, I ended up training with some incredible goalkeepers, some youth national team goalkeepers. For a while, the trainings were run by a guy who played D1 and actually had a national team call up for, I believe it was Puerto Rico. Played a friendly against the United States and everything. So I had some very, very high level goalkeeper training. And I think without that, right, I don't end up anywhere close to where I've been in the game and been able to play at the level that I play at. So I think it's really important to do both. The types of things you train in goalkeeper training are going to be a little bit different than shots you might see in a team environment. And certainly there wasn't as much focus on playing with your feet. It was a lot more about goalkeeping technique and everything. But to all young goalkeepers out there, I think finding a group that you can train with, and people who know what they're talking about and are going to want to work through the finer points of goalkeeping with you is really important. It's not just shots, it's not just flying into the top corner, it's little things. It's positioning, it's where you set your hands, it's the angle that you attack crosses, it's all those little things that you want to find people who think like you to train them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we with our son as a goalkeeper, and he's still pretty young, but he loves the position, and he, still trains with his team with field stuff, and then his dad, my husband, is his coach, and he'll also do like this weekend. They were out of town at my other son's soccer tournament, and he went with them, and so the plan was, and I have no idea if this actually happened, was for him when they had downtime that they were going to do keeper sessions because his team is going to Dallas Cup in the next week. And so he wants to make sure that he's ready for that because we haven't had, I mean, we've been to a few tournaments over the last month in preparation, build up for that tournament. But as far as consistent like league games or anything, our league literally just starts this week. And for that team, we're having to push it back until after they get back from Dallas Cup. So it's, they haven't had a ton of consistent games to where he's able to, take on shots. So anyway, so he's been doing as much training on his own as he can. And he'll usually go when the weather's good enough. And you would know, being in cities that have snow, obviously going outside isn't always an option. One of the things he used to do that I haven't heard as much of recently is hitting the ball off the wall in our house and just catching it off the wall. So he hasn't been doing that as much lately. But anyway, so he definitely tries to get as much hands on the ball as much as possible so that he can practice well. We also have to go like buy new goalie gloves for him and things like that because I'm pretty sure his last pair have gotten holes in them again and whatever. So just another thing.
No, it's all about just building muscle memory when you're coming up. Just the more times you can catch a ball, no matter what the circumstances. I used to go out in the snow with someone, we clear off a little patch of turf, and we just hit volleys for 45 minutes if that's all the weather let us do. But so important just to, especially when you're still developing, rest is important and everything, but continuing to just get that, muscle memory over and over and over again, get your 10,000 reps in, whatever the magic number is, just ball in hands
Mm-hmm.
as much as possible. I think
Yeah.
for goalkeepers too, watching soccer is so important. And this, I think, is kind of what also got me into being a referee, right? Like as a goalkeeper, you're watching the game much more than anyone else is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, watching how the pros are doing things, you pick up on little things, right? Positioning, where people set themselves, how they move, I was never the strongest or fastest goalkeeper. I was 6'2", so pretty good height, but was able to compete with guys who I think had much better raw talent or ability than I had because I was always in the right place and my mind was always a step ahead of the game, um,
Hmm.
in a way that I think not everybody focuses on, especially if kind of the natural love for the game isn't there as much.
Yeah, and he's our kid where he's the one that if a soccer game is on, he'll be drawn to watching it and he'll see what's going on, or if we take him to a local MLS game for Real Salt Lake, he's the kid that will actually sit and for the most part will actually watch the game. Sometimes you take kids to games and they're all about the snacks and the food and what's going on around them, and they might watch the game for 5 minutes, or whatever. And so he loved being able to go to those games and watch games, and he's the one that will, I say, job shadow his dad as far as coaching. We have a really funny picture that I took a few years ago of him. His dad was coaching one of the teams that he had in like a tournament, and he was standing just a couple steps behind him, basically mimicking what he was doing. And so I think that has also helped him as like a keeper because he reads the body, he reads, what they're doing. So that's something that he has been able to, for a 12-year-old, being able to start figuring that out at such a young age is a huge advantage for him, especially at his age where even though he's eating me out of house and home, I'm still waiting for that growth spurt to happen. We keep saying it'll eventually happen, but it hasn't happened yet. But so he's still slightly on the smaller side on his team, but he is very athletic and he's able to maneuver. We call him Spider Boy or whatever because he loves Spider-Man. But then, like, since he's gone into goalkeeping, like the some of the saves and things that he's done. Anyway, so he loves it. But so transitioning, you said part of the reason why you were able to transition from goalkeeping to reffing. So what was your first experience or exposure to trying out refereeing for you?
So I've always kind of had a natural inclination towards refereeing. I don't really know where it came from. Even watching like NFL football as a kid, I would have just this weird uncanny ability to call out penalties and to the quizzical amusement of my parents and everything. So I think to
Mm-hmm.
some degree it's kind of always been there. But certainly as I got into college and during the off seasons was looking for ways to stay really fit, um, make a little bit of money as well. It was kind of a natural thing that popped up, to stay within the game, build connections within the game, meet a lot of people, etc. So I did it for a summer, I think after my sophomore year of college, and actually, believe it or not, hated it, and was really driven out of it, honestly, by parental abuse. If I'm being completely transparent, I
Mm-hmm.
tried it. They kind of started me with like boys U13 games. Um, and I think it was one of those things where like the soccer that I was refereeing was so far away from the soccer that I was playing that it was really difficult for me to kind of titrate, what might not be a foul in, NCAA play is definitely a foul for a 13-year-old boy. So I
Mm-hmm.
think there was some of that kind of natural adjustment for me. Um, but I remember I was working a showcase at the Soccerplex in Germantown, Maryland, and just like the amount of vitriol that was directed my way for a tournament match that really had no, it was not the top division of this bracket. It was not, I don't even think there
Mm-hmm.
was any impact on who was going through to the, from the group stage or anything like that. And I just kind of remember walking away and being like, wow, that was just not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think for a while I was actually really turned off to reffing and didn't really come back to it until I was done with my playing days. And then kind of had, a think to myself about, do I want to continue trying to play at a high level? Do I want to get into coaching?
Mm-hmm.
And refereeing kind of came back for me a little bit, as a way to stay competitive, really flexible hours in terms of refereeing. As an
Hmm.
adult, right? That is something you kind of have to think about in a way that, you don't as a kid. And so I got back into it when I was living in Boston, and this time kind of made it clear to the people that I was being ushered along by in the referee scene that I wanted to work games at the same level that I played at. That
Hmm.
if I was going to do this, it was important for me to be reaching towards the top echelons of the game, both just for my own personal enjoyment. It's more fun to watch high level matches and to be a part of that atmosphere. And also, it kind of had the most direct tie and direct relevancy to the soccer that I was used to and had been involved with for the past few years. So that's really taken off since I started that. Um, I got into it, I would say, kind of at an ECNL level, so doing a lot of boys and girls upper age group ECNL, and refereeing is very much a put your time in and get experience kind of field. I think there are a lot of assigners out there who have been working with refs for years, decades, 20, 30 years, and they're very quick to give new referees opportunities, but they also are very unafraid to, you know, give you a whole run of games in a league where they think that you'll be pretty comfortable, wait for you to get your sea legs under you, and then sort of when you're ready to say, hey, I've mastered this level, let me move on to something else, then to bump you up. So I pretty quickly went from working ECNL type games to getting into the amateur adult scene,
Hmm.
which is pretty competitive up in Boston. It's a big soccer hotbed. There are a lot of guys from D1 and top D3 schools playing in the amateur leagues up there. But I definitely felt a little bit called back to the youth game as well. And so when I moved to DC, I made it a point of emphasis to get involved in MLS Next. I love the things they're doing at MLS Next. I think it's a fantastic program. And I knew that I wanted to be around that sort of high level of youth soccer,
Hmm.
where there's kind of that level of competitiveness, of drive. It's, kids who are still full time in the game and are trying to make a future in the game. I think that was something that really appealed to me.
So, for new referees, do you think it's beneficial? Because, like you said, where you had been in, basically collegiate play, and then when you started refing, you went down to like a younger age group. Did you think that that jump was difficult for you? And is it difficult for most referees where, because like I had a neighbor who earned money by refing. He was a teenager, I don't know, middle schooler. He started refing in middle school, all the way through high school, and he started, refing 4v4 or 7v7 games. I don't remember how what it was at the time. I don't even know if 7v7 was a thing at that point. Is it better for those younger kids to start out with younger ages or ref what they know? Because I know, like, for me, I hate seeing a kid who is the same age as players refing games when they're teenagers. But also, from your perspective, it sounded like maybe you would have felt more comfortable refing an NCAA game because that's the level of play that you were used to seeing. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I think a lot of parents underestimate how hard it is to referee youth age groups for soccer.
Mm-hmm.
There's such body disparities between kids, especially I think on the boys' side, where you can be reffing a U14 game, and you can have somebody who's 4'9" and hasn't hit their growth spurt, or 5'1" and hasn't hit their growth spurt, and is 120 pounds soaking wet against a kid who's 5'11" or 6 feet tall at 180 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And when those two kids collide, and mom has never seen her son get run into before and bounce about 3 feet away from somebody, and is still kind of in the stage where these challenges prompt an emotional reaction. And it's not just, oh, I've
Mm-hmm.
seen that a million times before. Those are tough situations to officiate. And, I think younger referees, it's definitely good to get involved at younger age groups. And then I think from there, if it's something where you are identified as someone who has a talent for it, has the ability to manage games at a high level, that will get noticed. There's a lot of pathways for younger referees to get identified and moved up. You'll start getting invited to things like State Cup Finals weekend and big regional showcase tournaments will always have a referee academy where they invite some of their top up and coming refs from the area. Um, you'll be quickly identified. But I do think it's always good when you're young to start off with age groups where you're a little bit older than the players. But I think once by the time you hit high school, certainly the upper years of high school, you should pretty much be able to referee anybody, and referee at the level that you want to. I think some associations might have some age limit requirements, so I don't want to speak as if I'm the deciding authority here, but in my
Mm-hmm.
personal opinion, I think by the time you're 17, 18, you can ref at a pretty high level.
Mm-hmm. And I know that I've seen some like viral videos or posts or whatever of some younger referees who have basically kept calm in some pretty awkward situations. I think most recently there was that I remember seeing there a fight broke out between parents on a sideline somewhere, and a 14 or 15-year-old, could have even been a female referee, basically ushered both teams off the field away from where the parents were. I don't know if you saw this. I don't know why I saw this. I'm assuming it's my algorithm. But, and I was just like, man, for her to be able to stay calm, or whoever it was, if I'm not sure if it male or female, but anyway, that person had the mindfulness to protect the players on the field and get them away from the adult situation that was happening, until whatever, I don't know how it ended up. But there, like you said, there are some kids who are up and coming, and whoever that was, I hope that they definitely, obviously they got recognized because the post went viral over what happened. But things like that where a 15-year-old has more clarity over the situation than the adults on the sideline because they're breaking out into a fight, and I have no idea what happened to ignite the fight. So I have absolutely no idea, but it's definitely scary to hear about those types of things. And I know that especially since COVID has happened, we at least as coaches and in the area of soccer are hearing about the refereeing shortages and the things that have been going on with referees in the last few years. And so it's always good to hear from the referees, because I've known, like, one of the coaches at my club, she got certified as a referee and she's been reffing in our league. I believe she went up to regionals or President's Cup or something, and she was reffing up there in Idaho. It is good to see people setting that example. I don't think I could personally ever referee a game, so I definitely wouldn't ever want to say that I could do a good job at that, because I definitely probably can't. What would you say to people who are interested in becoming a referee, but they've seen some of the, negative things that have been going on around the sport and being a ref?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the answer is all about your mindset. So I think one of the things that the refereeing community struggles with, and that's individual referees struggle with, and I think we don't talk enough about, is maintaining poise no matter what the situation is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, 120 yards by 80 yards, or whatever size field you're playing on, is a really, really big space. And despite how intense things can feel in the heat of a game, despite how much you may really enjoy being in that intense moment between two teams, there's always actually usually much more space and time to settle things down than you probably think there is. Um, it's very, very rare to have situations where something truly escalates beyond your control as a referee, especially if you've done a good job of managing the personalities and the temperaments that you have up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
There are obviously always going to be some outlier situations. No one can control if two parents decide to come to fisticuffs.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's one lesson that I've kind of taken, it's that, you know, through applying some of these lessons that they'll teach you as a referee about how to control the demeanor of a match, how to keep matches from escalating, things like that. You know, usually these big incidents that you see are because there's something in the buildup that hasn't been addressed. There's
Mm-hmm.
some kind of incident that where the referee maybe hasn't managed the game to an optimal degree. And that's not to say that we should go around blaming referees for, incidents of supporter violence or coach outbursts or anything like that. But, certainly a lesson that I apply in my games is, you know, a lot of times if a coach yells at me, I actually don't need to yell back at him. And if players are dissenting, people will respond much, much better to calm explanations and you just kind of saying, hey man, I'm putting my best foot forward here. I'm trying to get these calls right. This is what I saw. I have faith in that decision. We can absolutely
Mm-hmm.
have a calm conversation later about something you might have seen or something I might have missed, and I'm happy to engage in that dialogue. And that calms people right down. Where I see referees make mistakes is getting into shouting matches, getting into ego contests with parents or coaches, or even players. I think the one of the things that as a referee you should always try to do is have a little bit of rapport with players going on.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's learning a couple names and using them throughout the match, or just a quick, I always will walk up to the winger in any game I'm refereeing before kickoff and just be like, hey, give me a score prediction, right? And just right away it kind of sets the tone that like you're another human being that's out there, and you're not
Mm-hmm.
seeing these as, seeing the players as your minions to control on the field or anything. It's that, hey, we're all here. We're going to get through this game together. I'm going to help manage you through the game together. But I'm not some guy out here to ruin your fun or make my impression on the game. This is all about, us kind of trying to put together a game as 22 players and three referees that's as beautiful as possible. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's, kind of the perspective that I've evolved to have. And I think, if you're thinking about refereeing or if you're a new referee, just remembering that above all is your job, right? Is to be a neutral and fair arbiter of the rules and to try and facilitate an environment for players where they can play fairly, they can play safely, and they can play beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I loved what you said about, we're all human and sometimes, we miss things or we'll have an open conversation because I know that a lot of times some of the frustrations coming as a coach and a parent when we think we see something that maybe a referee didn't see or they saw differently because obviously we're at different angles and things look differently from different angles. And when you watch things like VAR and you're like, yes, in slow motion I can see that, but in the run of play it looks completely differently. So we always like when a referee is able to say something like, hey, I actually didn't see that, I'll watch out for it next time, or something like that. And so they're not trying to say that they saw it and they saw it differently. They're admitting, that's one of the things that we respect as parents and coaches is when, because we're all human. Like you said, you're not going to be able to see 100% of things. Sometimes, like in my son's game that I was watching over the weekend, just online, there were some off the ball things that were happening, and the ref was obviously not looking at that because they're watching where the ball is and where the run of play is. And so there were some things that were missed off the ball. But obviously that was something that the coach was trying to make the referees aware, whether it was the lineman or whoever, that stuff was happening away from the ball and to watch out for that because it was dangerous. We ended up having a player breaking his collarbone, and we felt like the referee in that game let it get a little bit out of hand. And we knew that an injury was probably going to happen. And unfortunately, it did. And so if we felt like, and this is me as a parent, not from a coach, I felt like just watching it, I felt like the referee needed to, like you said, manage the situation and the temperament of the game. It was a championship game. So obviously tempers are going to be high already because it's the final. And making sure that the tone was set early, and we didn't feel like that was done. So leading into that, question that I have for you is, when you guys do ref in tournaments, I'm assuming you guys should be aware as to, this is a group game, this is a consolation game, this is a final. I'm assuming that when it comes to certain age groups and finals, that we want our best of the best reffing these specific games because it's higher level, certain age groups and things like that. So were you guys made aware when you're going into these games, if something's on the line, I guess you could say, so that that you're probably going to expect, excitement from the parents and the sidelines?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, first off, it's really important to acknowledge, and this maybe isn't said a ton by referees, but I think it's important to acknowledge there are some really bad refs out there. There are some god awful refs that are refereeing soccer. And unfortunately, the way that the incentive scale is designed for refs, it's about game fees. You get paid as a ref the exact same if you show up and you run 5 miles, or if you stand in the center circle the whole time and you run half a mile throughout the course of a game. And one of the central challenges that refereeing faces is that the referees who are identified as putting in lots of running and great game management and foul recognition, ability to hand out, be brave and hand out yellow cards and send-offs when they're warranted, those folks are dragged kicking and screaming to the upper echelons of the game. And so oftentimes what you're left with at younger or lower levels is either referees who are new and learning, or referees who are not at the peak of the profession. And these are going to be folks who, some of them, and I don't want to speak for the referee community as a whole, and or certainly disparage, my fellow referees, but I've definitely refereed with people where I've gotten the sense where, hey, this person is here to collect the $60 game fee, and they don't really care what happens during the 80 minutes. They trust that, there's not enough referees to drive them out of the game. And so they know that they can continue to show up to this field like they've been doing for 15 years and collect the money. Referee pay is pretty good, I think, for a side hustle. But the difference between the upper echelons of refereeing and the younger or lower age groups is not so huge that you have a clear separation of referees, and that it becomes, there's a clear incentive to work hard at lower levels to move up to higher levels of refereeing if you are someone who's in it for the money, who compensation is a motivating factor for. If you go do a U13 ECNL game or any CSL, which was just kind of a club soccer league back up in New England, you could get $70 for being a head ref and 50 for being an AR. And there's a large swath of referees out there who they don't want to do the running and then get to the higher levels of the game and make $100 for a center ref and $70 for an AR. The money difference isn't enough to warrant everyone to put in the hard work and the learning and the investment to be involved in the games and move up to higher levels, if it isn't something that you're already intrinsically motivated to do. So I want to caveat that, right? Because it's something that parents, I think, get really frustrated about. It's like they're watching their kid play soccer and someone's essentially committed like second-degree assault on them. And they're just like, how in the world? Like, any sane person who's watching this is gonna buck against it and have a reaction and want to yell and be
Mm-hmm.
upset, doubly so, right, when it's your kid. And I think that's a totally understandable impulse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as your original question goes about do we prepare, do we have knowledge of the intensity of games that we are going into? The answer is absolutely. And there's a difference between how you officiate different types of games. I'm going off this weekend to referee Jeff Cup, which is the biggest probably showcase in Virginia. And those games will be officiated much, much differently than your local, or not local, but a regular league fixture in MLS Next.
Mm-hmm.
The intensity in Jeff Cup, the guys are playing for college spots. It's a college showcase. They're there for scholarships and placement on college teams. The intensity level is going to be high, but very, very focused. There's going to be no nonsense after the ball is dead. There's going to be a minimum of dissent from coaches. There's going to be a lot of situations that you can manage your way through. What's important, right, is that the kids have an opportunity to play and get seen, and they
Mm-hmm.
know that as well. Now, juxtapose that against a U14 tournament final where it's the culmination of a season, everyone's been working and training incredibly hard, or a state cup final, it's the U15 age group, where what matters right now more than anything else is winning and progression and going on to regionals if you're refereeing MLS Next or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Those games, you're going to have to be very aware that intensity is going to be so high. And you might need to produce an early yellow card. You might need to be, a little bit less of a leash for dissent, especially if you know some teams that have a history of feisty players or coaches. So yes, we absolutely evaluate who's playing, what the environment is, and what's called for in terms of intensity. I think one thing that I would also call out, I know I'm on a bit of a monologue here, but to parents, there may be times where you see a referee whose intensity seems to be a little bit lower than the game. So you used a great example of a tournament final, and the ref might not look up to it, or he might be 30 yards behind the play, and you might be wondering, hey, what's going on here? Is the ref not clued into how important of a game this is? Why is he late getting there for a really hard challenge that's a bang bang decision between a PK and a great slide tackle by the center back?
Mm-hmm.
It's not uncommon for referees, especially at younger age groups, to work a continuous string of back-to-back games.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to upper levels, they try to limit it. I think the most we'll ever do is three MLS Next games in a row. For a lot of the amateur adult games, it's two game sets. In college, for semi-pro, it's one game at a time. But it is not uncommon, especially for youth soccer, for you to be watching a referee and it's their fifth game that day. And I
Yeah.
think that's also something to keep in mind when you're thinking about, hey, why is the ref doing what he or she is doing on the field right now?
Yeah, I was just in Las Vegas this weekend, and because of the rain that we had and delays and reschedules that they had to do, on Sunday, my game was the first game at 8 a.m., and then there were one or two games between our next game, which was supposed to be at like 10:30, I think, because they're just 7v7, so they're like, and they shortened them to be two 20-minute halves with a 5-minute halftime. And so those refs, like, they were basically there all morning long just on that field. They'd walk away to go over to the tent, and then they'd walk back. They'd go, get a drink or go to the bathroom while we were switching up fields, and then they'd come back. So those people were there, all day long, I'm assuming, on that same field, which I have seen before. Same thing in our league where some refs are always at these same fields because they live around the corner or something like that, and so they always ref games at these fields. And so we know usually we're going to get one of three refs in a specific area, usually, just because of coordinating and stuff like that. So I have seen that, and so thank you to the referees for being willing to do that and everything. Thank you guys for listening to part 1 of my conversation with Charlie Sandson. We will pick up right where we left off in tomorrow's episode, so please stay tuned for that. Thank you guys for kicking it with me, and have a great day. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at kickitwithkatie_podcast_ between all the words. You can reach out to me with questions at kickitwithkatiepod@gmail.com. I also have a feature with SpeakPipe where you can leave me your own voicemail message if you want to be featured on the podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.